You've got to put structures in place that enable not only the sales rep to know that information, but that sales rep's manager to know that information, and then that manager's manager to know that information without having to have loads of conversations. So the philosophy for me is all around connecting the dots. So I think as a CRO, you sit at quite a unique juncture within the business. So I run sales, I run marketing, I run customer success and account management, or we call it account management renewals within our organization. So I think the key thing for that is not just focusing on one part of what I would call like that customer journey, but actually every single touch point that a customer has with your organization is equally as important to driving revenue. So whether that be from, a video that they see on LinkedIn of how, the company's talking, someone's talking about the product, through to that first engagement they have with an SDR for booking in a demo, through to how the AE does it, the customer success manager introduces themselves, through to then, actually getting the account manager and the renewal come through. I think the key thing for me is that every single touch point during that process is equally as important. And the businesses that get it right are the ones that focus on that whole customer journey rather than, just driving, say, new business revenue.
Yeah, connecting the dots. See, I've heard some CROs say that in their first CRO role, the challenge was actually a mindset shift from being like a sales leader, VP of sales, to thinking about, you're right, the whole customer journey. Often they were focused on closing revenue to begin with and realize there's more to it than that. I'm wondering what kind of mentality shifts you've had from being a CRO and also a co-founder, and how you've changed from being a closed focused salesperson leader to something more holistic, and what that journey's looked like.
Yeah, so I think that journey really starts and ends with actually looking at like the quality of revenue. So when you're a pure sales leader, whether that be, VP of sales, a sales manager, even just a team lead, you're just obsessed with hitting that number, and you'll almost do that number, at any cost, with any business. So, fast and loose with discounts at the end of quarters, and just bringing on revenue, and that is the focus. And really, actually, there's nothing wrong with that, because you need people in your organization who are still doing that, because that's what really drives it forward. But I think the mind shift changes when you start to look at it more holistically, and you start to be, churn number is on your head. The CAC to LTV ratios are now on your head, and these are what you're being measured by. Then you need to think about not only, are we growing revenue? Great, but what's the quality of that business that we're actually winning? Because is that going to retain? Is it going to be a long-term client? Is it the right product market fit? So I think that's probably the biggest mentality change that people go through as they move from a VP of sales through to a sort of CRO role.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right to say we do need those closers, don't we? We have to have people driving revenue. Obviously, you've been in a business that's matured massively, and it's grown massively from where you started to where you are now. And I'm interested to hear more about that maturity and holistic approach as the business has changed, as it's grown, as it's matured, and become what it is today.
Yeah, well, I think the things to go back to the start. So 5.5 years ago now, there was two of us, myself and my business partner Steve, 2 laptops, 2 mobile phones. That was Sourcebreaker in essence, an outsourced development team in the Ukraine, and that was our business. Then when we started hiring our very first salespeople, which some of the very first salespeople are still with us today, and they're like sales leaders now within the organization, which is super cool. You have very good control over everything that's happening in every single process, because it's so small. So literally every client name, every deal process, where it is in the pipeline, not only, on a report, you can see it moving through your pipeline, you actually know exactly what conversations are having, what the feedback was from that deal. As you start to grow and go to now we're, sort of just about to touch 70 heads, all of that information is still there, but you need it like in reports, you need it in dashboards, you need it in Salesforce, because no one can fit that amount of information in their head anymore. So what you've got to do is, as you start to grow, you've got to put structures in place that enable, not only the sales rep to know that information, but that sales rep's manager to know that information, and then that manager's manager to know that information, without having to have loads of conversations. And I think that's really where the company's matured to, is understanding, what's going on, rather than just needing to, have those individual conversations with reps. Being a bit more data driven, I suppose, is probably the first one. The second is then actually maturing into structures. So, at the start, it's, leads are coming in, and, you start with like round robins and throwing leads to whoever. People are going on demos. You then need to start to think about patches. And this is something I have conversations with other, sales leaders all the time about, is, how do you split markets down? How do you do that? Like, it's almost an impossible answer to that conversation, because nothing that worked for particular other business is necessarily going to work for you, or anything in between. So you have to then determine markets. You have to constantly analyze those markets to see, are they fair? So people got a good patch to be going at? Are you maximizing revenue from those particular parts of the market? Then you start to look at, okay, well, what type of segment of customer are we selling to? So, are we selling to small businesses at the start? A lot of startups, we certainly did. We focused on, those fast growth, smaller companies, just as we were, and sort of rode with them. Whereas now, 5 years on, we're working with some of the largest enterprise customers in the world. We work with 3 out of the 4 largest recruitment companies on the globe. So that's a completely different sales process. So I think as the company matures, you go through all of these different stages of maturity, which is super fun. And I think that's the one thing that, being in a SaaS organization right from the start, is very unique, because you see every different cycle of that. You're not just coming in at a point where it's all been set out for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to that beginning place, because for me, it's a ferment where so much stuff happens. And that stage from which every deal personally and every rep personally, to actually, like you said, you have to take a step back. Interesting, almost from an emotional, personal level, how you found taking that step back. Like, what's the moment that clicked for you when you realized it was necessary, and when did you start to relinquish some control? How did you find it?
Yeah, it's the toughest thing. I think. Yeah. I don't think any sales leader or salesperson out there is not going to be a control freak. Like, that is part of being a salesperson. You're good because you know everything that's going on and you're in control of that process. So relinquishing that is very, very hard. I think the key thing to, any business, and especially like a sales organization part of the business, is just having amazing people. We were very, very lucky that, I've got people in the organization who've been with me for, 4 or 5 years, who came up and sort of grew up with the business as well. So you can trust them implicitly that, not only do they deliver, and they deliver their numbers because they're really good, salespeople, but they've also been with us right from the ground up. So our VP of sales in the US, he was our very first sales hire. So he was a grad. He'd literally never done days in sales previously. So we've managed to bring him up and teach him how to do stuff our way, the Sourcebreaker way. Our head of commercial sales in the UK, again, he'd done like sort of a 6-month placement somewhere else, gone traveling, come back, joined us. So I was very lucky that actually my 2 sort of number 2s in terms of different regions have brought up with the business. So you're easier to relinquish control with those people. But yeah, it is difficult, because you've got to make a decision in your head that at some point, if you want to know everything about every deal, you become the thing that slows the organization down. So it's understanding, okay, so which parts of what opportunities do you need to know about? So if we're talking about our commercial team, and they're doing tens and tens of deals every single month, I need to know that agnostically. I need to be able to see a bird's eye view of what's going on, what's in the pipeline, where it's going, have a couple of chats. I might identify particular key opportunities that they're working on, and how do we dig into those, and how something's stuck at stuck at proposal stage for more than 35 days. What's going on here? That type of stuff. Whereas our enterprise pipeline, I still run the enterprise team directly myself, so they report straight into me. So with those opportunities that, a potential £1 million plus ops, you're still very involved. So I think it's just working out at what point do you slow the organization down, and therefore you have to relinquish control. And choosing, you don't have to relinquish it all. It's not just, sit back, off you guys go. I'll sit in my office and knock on my door if you ever need me. So I think you just have to choose and pick your battles.
Yeah, it's a good final point, choosing and picking your battles. So you have this great team who you've nurtured from the beginnings of their career, which, by the way, is really cool. Like, congrats for that. When do you start to stress test those people? When do you start to see how they perform when you relinquish control, and how do you measure how successful they are as a follow-up to that?
Yeah, so I think you just constantly drop more and more responsibility onto people. I think one of the biggest learns over the last 5.5 years of running a business, whether it be talking about salespeople or talking about customer success managers or anyone within the business, ops, finance, if you hire the right people who have got the aptitude, the intelligence, and the want and will to learn, then actually you can just throw more and more and more at people, and they will sink or swim. And most of the time they swim if you've got the hiring right. So I think it's one of those things, is just keep drip feeding it. Don't do it all at once. Don't throw a whole team at somebody from day one. When they've just been a rep. Start with, we had people who would be bringing in and they would report into me, but then they'd be mentored by one of the senior people. So they've then mentored a couple of salespeople or a couple of SDRs through the process before they then manage people. So it's just looking at all of those different steps of how can you help them on that journey, and then also how can you be available. So I think one of the biggest challenges for somebody in sort of my position is time availability. As a CRO, you're probably the busiest person in the organization, because you touch so many different things. So it's making sure that you have those regular touch points. So I have one-to-ones for half an hour every single week with every single direct report to me, which, if you actually add that up over a year, is a huge amount of time. But I see a huge value in that investment in time into those people, because it means that you can constantly have communication. If they are struggling with anything, you're only a few days away from catching up with them if they can't just, catch you in the office.
Yeah, absolutely. Understood. There's one thing I was really interested to ask you, because you're in a unique place here. Like most CROs, if things don't work out, or if they want to change their position, they can move to a different business, but it's a bit different for you.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested to hear what that brings and what that breathes into your role, your passion for the job, and how you execute on the day-to-day.
Yeah, I suppose being a major shareholder of any business changes the dynamic of it. You potentially are a bit more risk averse with certain decisions, but potentially more, actually, because your gain is so big, you can take risks, and it's all about driving the business forward. I think one of the things that makes my job different to potentially a normal CRO is actually all of the different metrics that measured on, would probably be the way to say it, at the board, is as much as, like we talked about, new business revenue, churn, the key SaaS metrics are on a CRO's head anyway. Actually, what we're spending, what's our losses, what's our all of these are still in the back of your head as well. So so you've got to be thinking of it as a business owner as well as a CRO. You can't just focus on we'll get to these metrics at any cost. You've got everything else into it. I think the one thing that does help with that, though, is being able to bring multiple teams together. So I think a lot of companies can get quite disjointed between like the sales function to the development teams to the product teams. to finance. But actually, when you realize that, everybody is working towards the same thing, it isn't, I'm not sat in a meeting saying, why have we not developed this product? Because that means we can't sell to this. It's actually, you have a full understanding of it. So you can not only understand it yourself, but you can then distill that down into your teams a lot more effectively, because you understand everything that's going on.
Yeah. Okay. So at the beginning, we're saying how, difference between a sales leader, CRO, is you do have that more holistic strategic approach. It sounds like being a CRO who's also a large shareholder, founder, almost has that on another level as well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, Adam, final question. If you're in a room full of CROs and founders, business leaders, revenue leaders, like the best people to ever do this, what would you ask them?
Oh, wow. Good question. So I think would be the bit that really interests me is all around hiring the best people. Because ultimately I'm a huge believer, maybe it's from the original recruitment background that I came from, and the market we sell into at the moment being recruitment agencies, but I'm a huge believer in it, that is the people that drive any organization. You can have the best strategy, the best product, but unless you've got the people to do the execution, you're going nowhere. And we see that all over, don't you? You see great products and you think, how did that never land? That was a great idea, and it was poorly executed. So I think if I was, in a room full of, the top CROs would be, how do they select who are the people? And especially if you think about some of, the fastest growing companies around the world at the moment, they must have people, salespeople throwing themselves at them, trying to work for these particular organizations. So, how do they select who gets the roles and who doesn't? I think it's probably the biggest thing I'd focus on.
Yeah, for sure. And especially for a company like yours, it's like the potential people, the rough diamonds who, like you said, they can come in as a grad and then end up as your VP of sales. And that is so important.